Hi, my name is Dane, and this is On a Map Updates. Today is Friday, the 20th of September, 2024. And today I want to tell you about an upgrade I did to On a Map this week. I'm going to start by explaining the situation, and then I'll tell you how I solved it and what I did. So when you're using On a Map as a regular user, and you're requesting data, and by that I mean you're, let's say, adding layers to your map, and each time you add a layer, you're requesting information such as weather data, or which species was seen where, or what conflicts happen where. That data that shows up on your map when you add that layer comes from an organization, which I'm calling, or we call, a service. So on a map, when you add the layer, on a map requests that information from that service and says, give me this information of this type, this many of them, etc., etc. Now, these services typically want to know who's using their software because their data is not free, and often their services are free, but they can't simply let anyone anywhere on the internet use their service as much as they want, because it can be abused, and they're going to pay a lot of money for their services. So they want to identify the users of their service. And the way they do this is kind of by assigning a key. For example, think of it as a sort of visitor pass. If you walk into an office building and they assign you at the front desk with a pass that identifies you while you're in the building, this is the same sort of thing. When On a Map needs to fetch data, it needs to provide it the key with the request for data, and then that service goes, okay, that's fine, you've requested this much data in the past, but this is a free service, and here's your data. Now, the problem comes when, as you can probably imagine, this is not such a problem for a service that has a huge global footprint and is providing their data for free, like iNaturalist or GBIF. But this does become a problem when the data that they're providing is very valuable and they charge a premium, they charge a price for that data, or just when they have very specific limitations, like On a Map can only request the data 100 times a month or 100 times a day or something like that. Those limitations therefore matter, and being able to use that key is critical, because if somebody else was to steal the On a Map key, then they would be able to request data as if they were On a Map, and that would be quite a problem. Now, the reason that this is a problem for On a Map is we can't just store the key in the code of our website, in what we call the front end, the part that you use when you're using On a Map. What you see and what you use, that app, we can't just store the key in the app, because for a hacker, it's not that difficult for them to look in the code and copy out that key and use it. So we can't have anything sensitive in the code of the app. So what do? Well, we want to set up a middleman, a piece of software which is called an API gateway that sits between On a Map and the service. And that API, and when On a Map wants to fetch data, instead of requesting the data straight from that service, it instead goes via this API gateway. And what the API gateway can do for something like a key is it can attach the key to that request. So it can say, oh, On a Map, you're requesting this data, cool. Attach the key and then send that request on to the service. The service gives the data back, and then the API gateway can send that data straight back to your browser to when you want that layer. So the app itself, the front end, doesn't even need to know about the key. It doesn't need to. We'll never even see the key in our browsers, because it's being added kind of invisibly by the API gateway, just when the API gateway fetches that data on behalf of the app. Now, if that didn't make a whole lot of sense, don't worry, it's just a very helpful security feature. But API gateways do have a couple of other useful features. For example, for performance, to make requests work faster, an API gateway can cache responses. So if you're asking for the same data as somebody else, let's say the weather today in Paris, and another user requested that exact same data earlier today, then the API gateway can just send you that same data that user got, because it's cached, it's stored, because it doesn't need to refetch that data from the weather service, because it's got a copy of it from when it was fetched earlier. That's called caching. API gateways can do that. It's one of the many things they can do. And another one is they can help with stability of the platform. If all of the requests that OnAMap is making to various services, because there's lots of plugins for different data sources, the API gateway can do things like rate limiting. So they can say that if you're a user and you're using OnAMap very, very heavily, and you're requesting hundreds of different pieces of data or thousands of pieces of data in, for example, within 1 hour, then the API gateway can limit how much data that user can get because they're abusing the system. So that's called rate limiting. It's just preventing basically abuse of our systems. So there's a lot of very valuable features and services that an API gateway provides. And this week, I was able to do some research and select one. The one that I've chosen to use is called Kong Gateway. It's a very popular free and open source API gateway. And it's very well built. It's very reliable. And I also needed to install it somewhere. So I did a bit of research and I decided I needed to install it on a cloud provider. You might have heard of, for example, Amazon AWS, which is, I'm fairly sure, is the biggest cloud platform in the world, although Microsoft has a big one as well, and there's some others. And what it allows you to do is, in a nutshell, run software on their hardware, in other words, their servers, their computers, in some warehouse on the other side of the world. We don't need to know where it's running. It's just our software running on their devices and connected to the internet, which is the perfect kind of place that you would want to install something like this API gateway. It needs to be software that's running all the time, but not on my computer. It needs to run on somewhere public, connected to the internet. So I chose to use a cloud provider called Xneelo Cloud. So Xneelo is a South African web host, very, very reliable. I've been using them for years. Their service is great. And they've got a new product called Xneelo Cloud. And it's a really nice, simple cloud service. So I did some research, learned how to use it, and set up Kong Gateway on the Xneelo Cloud. And that was it. I obviously I had to do a lot of setup. I had to configure things and add keys and say what services OnAMap uses. But in a simple sense, I've set it up and it's working, which is really exciting. So it was a big step forward for OnAMap this week. I hope this has been interesting and informative. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments or send them to us and I'll be happy to answer them. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.